The maid saw the door before she saw the man. It was half open in the amber hallway, 1 quiet inch wider than it had been when she passed with the linen cart 11 minutes earlier. Rain moved across the tall windows behind her in cold blue lines, and the private wing of the house stayed too still for a place guarded by 6 men downstairs and 2 cameras above every turn. Inside the room, the bedside lamp was off. That was wrong. Mr. Calder always left one lamp on, not because he feared the dark, because he trusted darkness less than light. Every person in the house knew that about him without being told. The guards knew. The driver knew. The cook knew. The maid knew because she was the one who replaced the bulb every second Friday. Before it had time to die, Elena Marquez stood behind the linen cart with one hand resting on a stack of folded towels, listening to the rain and the low hum of the security panel at the end of the hall. Nothing flashed red. No alarm sounded. No radio cracked open with panic. The house believed no one had entered, but on the floor beside Mr. Calder's door, a thin trail of water marked the black marble. 3 drops. Then, nothing. Elena looked toward the staircase, where the nearest guard should have been visible through the iron railing. His post was empty. Only his untouched coffee sat on the console table. Steam gone. Dark surface, flat as glass. She did not step closer at first. A maid survived in houses like this by noticing without appearing to notice. She knew which voices meant anger and which meant fear. She knew which guests smiled too long at staff. She knew Mr. Calder never raised his voice when he was most dangerous, and never let anyone touch the small silver clock beside his bed. Through the narrow opening, she saw that clock lying face down on the carpet. Then she heard movement, not a footstep, a soft scrape, fabric against wood. Someone careful enough to breathe with the room. Elena's fingers tightened around the towel stack. The hallway light warmed the side of her face while the rain cooled the glass behind her. She wanted to call security. She wanted to back away. Instead, she noticed the smallest thing. The door had been opened from the inside. By morning, the hallway looked innocent again. The marble was dry. The guard was back at his post, with his tie straight and his radio clipped neatly to his shoulder. The silver clock stood beside Mr. Calder's bed, as if no one had touched it, its face turned toward the chair where he sometimes sat after midnight without drinking the whiskey poured for him. Elena did not mention the water. She carried breakfast in on a black tray at exactly 7. 2 eggs, untouched toast, coffee without sugar, and the small glass of mineral water he rarely finished. Mr. Calder stood near the rain-streaked window in a charcoal shirt with the sleeves buttoned, watching the courtyard below where black vehicles waited under the portico. He looked as if he had not slept. That was not unusual. What was unusual was the way his right hand rested near his ribs every time he breathed in. "Leave it," he said, without turning. Elena placed the tray on the table. The coffee cup clicked softly against the saucer. His eyes moved to that sound, not angry, aware. She lowered her gaze before he could decide she had seen too much, but she had already seen the chair by the bed. It was angled 3 inches away from the wall. The leather cushion held a shallow crease, as if someone lighter than him had sat there and risen carefully. On the carpet, beneath the edge of the bed, one dark thread clung to the wool. Elena knew thread. Laundry told the truth. People paid tailoring to hide. The thread was not from Mr. Calder's shirts. His were Egyptian cotton, black or white. He pressed hard enough to cut a line. This thread was dull navy, cheap, pulled from a sleeve or a hem. Is there something wrong with the room? He asked. The question arrived quietly. She kept her hands folded in front of her apron. No. Sir. His gaze held on her a second too long, then stopped measuring it. A guard near the door shifted his weight. Elena felt the warning in the movement. Staff did not study private rooms. Staff did not study private men. Staff cleaned, carried, disappeared. She bowed her head. I'm sorry. Mr. Calder looked back toward the window. Everyone is. The words were not sharp. That made them worse. Elena left with the empty tray from the night before. The whiskey glass on it had never been touched. The water glass had been moved to the opposite side. Mr. Calder was left-handed when tired, right-handed when watched. Whoever had been in that room had known which side to place it on. That afternoon, the head of security reviewed the logs after she asked whether the private wing had been checked. No entries, he said, barely looking up from his tablet. No motion after midnight. No breach. No visitor. Elena stood beside the service pantry, smelling lemon soap and warm metal from the dishwasher. The east stair guard left his post. His eyes lifted. Then, you saw that I saw his coffee. A small silence followed. Your work is linens, he said. Let us do ours. That should have ended it. For anyone else. Maybe it would have. But Elena had spent 3 years in large houses, learning that danger rarely announced itself where important people expected it. It hid in changed routines, in untouched drinks, indoors, left slightly open by someone who wanted a room to seem undisturbed. The next night, she changed her route. A to isprezeće, szapte sprezeće. She passed the private hallway with a basket of hand towels that did not need delivering. The lamp outside Mr. Calder's room was on. The door was closed. The guard was at the stairwell, awake this time, one thumb moving over his phone screen beneath his jacket. At to isprezeće, patruzeć și unu. She returned with polishing cloths. The guard's phone was gone. His coffee was untouched. And beneath Mr. Calder's door, a thin line of warm light appeared, then vanished. Elena stopped. The security panel at the end of the hall remained calm. The camera above her made its tiny mechanical turn, facing away from the bedroom for exactly 5 seconds before drifting back. 5 seconds, long enough for someone who knew the rhythm. She did not move until the hallway settled again. Then she saw it, near the baseboard, a pale smear on the floor, almost invisible against the marble. Not blood, not mud, soap, residue, the kind left by service shoes after crossing the old laundry corridor downstairs. No guest used that corridor. No guard liked it because the ceiling was low and the pipes sweated cold water in the dark. By morning, the smear would be gone. The staff would polish it away before anyone powerful saw anything that made them uncomfortable. The logs would still show nothing. The guards would still say no one had entered. Elena looked at the closed door. Inside, Mr. Calder did not call out. That frightened her more than if he had. The next morning, Elena began with the laundry because laundry did not lie. The private linens from Mr. Calder's floor arrived before sunrise, stacked neatly in a cart that smelled faintly of starch, zidar, and the expensive soap used only in the private wing. She worked alone in the basement room where old pipes trembled behind the walls and rainwater tapped through a narrow drain near the service exit. Mr. Calder's sheets had been changed twice in 3 days. That alone was unusual. He disliked strangers entering his room and often delayed service for as long as possible. Elena unfolded the top sheet. Nothing. She checked the fitted sheet. Nothing. Then she picked up the pillowcase. A faint crease caught her eye immediately. Not the imprint of a head. Not a wrinkle from sleep. 2 narrow depressions pressed into the fabric near the lower edge. Someone had lifted the pillow, using only 2 fingers. Carefully, deliberately, Elena held the pillowcase beneath the laundry light. Whoever had entered the room had not searched recklessly. They had known exactly where to touch and exactly what not to disturb. She folded the linen and placed it aside. As she reached for the next bundle, a dull navy thread caught on the edge of a towel. The same color, the same cheap weave, the same kind she had found near Mr. Calder's bill. Her stomach tightened. 2 matching traces from 2 different nights. That was no longer coincidence. Elena. She turned. Mrs. Vale stood in the doorway, holding a clipboard. The housekeeper's expression gave away nothing. You're behind on guest linens. Elena nodded. I'll finish them. Mrs. Vale remained where she was. You've been spending time near the private hallway. The statement landed with more weight than a question. Elena carefully folded the towel in her hands. I had work there. No one assigned you work there. The washing machines rolled softly behind them. Elena lowered her eyes. People lasted longer in houses like this, when they understood which truths could be spoken and which could not. Mrs. Vale stepped closer. This house is not kind to people who decide they know more than they should. Elena said nothing. The older woman watched her for another moment before leaving. Only after the door closed did Elena allow herself to breathe again. Later that afternoon, while organizing the service cards, she found another detail. One of the towels from Mr. Calder's floor carried the faint smell of wet concrete and rusted metal. Not perfume, not cologne, not anything from the private wing. The scent reminded her immediately of the old laundry corridor beneath the house. The corridor no longer appeared on modern floor plans. Most of the staff avoided it because the ceiling hung low enough to force taller men to duck. The pipes overhead constantly sweated cold water. Nobody passed through there unless they had a reason. Elena stood still for a long moment. Then another thought arrived. Whoever entered Mr. Calder's room was not using the main staircases. They were coming from somewhere the guards barely remembered existed. That evening, Mr. Calder appeared in the kitchen, unexpectedly. The atmosphere changed. Before he even entered, conversation softened. The driver stepped aside. One of the cooks lowered his eyes. Elena was folding dinner napkins near the service counter when she sensed him stop nearby. Who changed my sheets? He asked. Mrs. Vale appeared almost instantly. I assigned the rotation. Sir. But Mr. Calder's eyes remained on Elena. Did you find anything? The room fell silent. Elena understood immediately that the question carried a trap. If she admitted she had been paying attention, she risked crossing a boundary she had no right to cross. If she denied it, she would be lying. She chose carefully. Your pillowcase was handled by someone who did not sleep there. No one moved. A pan hissed quietly somewhere behind her. Mr. Calder's left hand stopped midway to his coat button, only for a second. Then it continued. Explain. Elena spoke softly. Someone entered after midnight. They knew where the cameras turn. They touched the pillow. They moved the water glass. They left traces from the old laundry corridor. The kitchen became impossibly still. Mr. Calder stared at her for several seconds. Are you sure Elena remembered the thread? The towel? The coffee? The clock? The camera? Yes. One of the guards at the far end of the room shifted uneasily. Mr. Calder never looked away from her. For the first time since she had arrived at the estate, Elena had the distinct feeling that he was no longer seeing a maid. He was seeing someone who had noticed something everyone else missed. That realization followed her long after the conversation ended. That night, she returned to the private hallway, not because she was curious anymore, because she needed to know whether she had been right. She waited on the upper service landing, overlooking the corridor below. The old stairwell smelled of dust and cold iron. From there, she could see the security camera above Mr. Calder's room without being seen herself. At exactly 1, 2, 3, 6, the camera rotated away. 5 seconds. Elena counted silently. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A shadow moved beneath it. Her breath stopped. The figure did not run, did not hide, did not hesitate. It crossed the blind spot with the confidence of someone who had done it before. A navy sleeve caught the hallway light for less than a second. Then the figure reached Mr. Calder's door. The handle turned. The door opened. No forced entry. No alarm. No struggle. The visitor disappeared inside. Elena waited. 10 minutes. 15. 20. The rain tapped softly against distant windows. Nothing happened. No raised voices. No argument. No sign of danger. Finally, the door opened again. The figure stepped back into the hallway and disappeared toward the lower service corridors, empty-handed. Calm, gone. Elena remained frozen in place. None of it made sense. If the visitor intended harm, there had been opportunity. If the visitor intended theft, nothing had been taken. When she finally approached the room, the lamp inside was glowing softly. Mr. Calder sat alone beside the rain-covered window. The untouched whiskey glass remained on the side table. You followed them, he said, without turning around. Elena stopped at the doorway. You knew I know more than people think. Rain moved slowly down the glass. Who are they? She asked. The answer took longer than expected. Someone who used to matter. Elena watched him carefully. There was no fear in his voice. No anger. Only exhaustion. Are they threatening you? No. Stealing from you? No. Then why hide it, Mr. Calder remained silent. The silence itself became an answer. Because exposing the visitor would destroy something he was still trying to protect. Elena looked toward the empty chair beside the window. The chair no longer looked random. It looked expected, prepared, waiting. For the first time, she wondered whether the hidden visitor was never the danger at all. Perhaps the real danger was what would happen if the rest of the house discovered why they kept coming back. The next evening, Elena found Mr. Calder alone in the library. Rain drifted softly against the tall windows, turning the city lights beyond the glass into blurred streaks of gold and silver. The room smelled of old leather, cedar shelves, and the faint smoke from a fireplace that had not been lit in weeks. A chessboard sat untouched beside a lamp. One white knight lay on its side near the edge of the board. Mr. Calder was reading when she entered. Though the same page had been open long enough to suggest he was not reading at all, Elena paused near the doorway. "You should tell security," she said quietly. His eyes lifted from the book. "Why?" "Because the cameras aren't protecting you." A faint shadow crossed his expression. "They were never meant." Elena took a step closer. "Then what are they protecting?" The question lingered in the room. Mr. Calder closed the book. The sound felt louder than it should have. "The wrong things," he said. Elena looked toward the rain-dark glass. The answer unsettled her more than any denial would have. She thought about the visitor slipping through blind spots, about the untouched whiskey, about the empty chair that seemed to belong to someone who was never officially there. Then she said the thing she had been trying not to say. "You trust that person more than your guards." Silence followed. Mr. Calder's eyes remained fixed on her. The air in the room seemed to tighten. "Be careful, Elena." His voice was calm. That made it more dangerous. She should have stopped. Instead, she held his gaze. "You knew they were coming every night." Slowly, Mr. Calder stood. The chair moved across the wooden floor behind him. For the first time since she arrived at the estate, anger appeared on his face. Not loud anger, not explosive anger. Something colder, something controlled. "You think you've solved something. I think you're letting someone close enough to hurt you." His jaw tightened. "No." "Then tell me why." The question remained between them. Rain tapped softly against the window. Neither looked away. Finally, Mr. Calder turned toward the city beyond the glass. "Because sometimes the only person who can hurt you is the one you're trying to protect." Elena felt the words settle heavily into the silence. The anger disappeared as quickly as it arrived. What remained looked exhausted, more exhausted than any sleepless night could explain. She suddenly realized that whatever connected him to the visitor had existed long before the guards, the cameras, and the estate itself. She left the library, carrying more questions than answers. But one thing had changed. For the first time, she no longer believed the visitor represented a threat. She believed they represented a wound. Elena avoided the private wing for 2 nights. She stayed where people expected her to be. Laundry rooms, service corridors, storage closets, places where folded linens demanded attention and difficult thoughts could be postponed. She told herself she was respecting boundaries. The truth was simpler. She did not know what to do with what she had learned. Because sometimes the only person who can hurt you is the one you're trying to protect. The sentence followed her through every task. On the 3rd evening, she was sorting freshly pressed coats in the garment room when she noticed something unusual. One of Mr. Calder's charcoal overcoats hung slightly apart from the others. Inside the pocket was a folded receipt, not recent. The paper had yellowed with age. Elena unfolded it carefully. The date was 8 years old. The receipt came from a small garage workshop on the edge of the city. She stared at it for several seconds. People forgot receipts. People threw them away. They did not carry them for nearly a decade, unless the paper mattered less than the memory attached to it. The name of the workshop felt familiar. Then she remembered the photograph she had glimpsed days earlier. A younger Victor Calder, standing beside another man outside a garage, both smiling, neither looking powerful, neither looking dangerous. Elena folded the receipt and slipped it back exactly where she had found it. Something inside her shifted. She stopped thinking about a hidden visitor. She started thinking about a hidden life. Later that night, she found herself near the old maintenance corridors beneath the estate. The air smelled of damp concrete and rusted pipes. Water dripped slowly somewhere in the darkness. As she passed a sealed service wall, she heard voices, not loud, not angry. Familiar. Elena stopped. The voices came from behind a maintenance hatch, hidden among old utility panels. One corner stood slightly open. Through the narrow gap, she saw Mr. Calder seated at a small metal table. Across from him sat another man, older now than the photograph suggested. Gray touched his dark hair. His jacket sleeve was navy blue. The missing thread, finally, had a face. Neither man noticed her. "You should stop coming here." "Mr. Calder said, "You should stop pretending those guards can protect you." The older man replied. A faint smile crossed his face before disappearing. "You built an empire and still leave the same lamp on every night." Mr. Calder looked away. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then the older man reached into his pocket and placed something on the table between them. A silver watch. Old, scratched, broken. Mr. Calder stared at it. Elena watched his shoulders stiffen. "The day that happened wasn't your fault," the older man said quietly. The silence that followed seemed endless. "You weren't there." Mr. Calder's answer came immediately. "I was supposed to be." Elena lowered her eyes. She suddenly understood why security had never been told, why the cameras remained conveniently blind, why the visitor entered openly instead of secretly. The older man was not returning to threaten Victor Calder. He was not returning to forgive him either. He returned because he was the last person alive who remembered the man Victor had been before. Guilt became part of his routine. Every night, he crossed the hidden corridor and sat beneath the amber lamp because Victor Calder could not bring himself to walk back into that past alone. When Elena finally stepped away from the maintenance hatch, the rain had stopped outside. For the first time since the mystery began, she understood why the visitor kept returning. The question was no longer who he was. The question was whether Victor Calder would ever allow himself to stop carrying what happened 8 years ago. 3 nights later, the house changed. Elena noticed it before anyone said a word. Additional guards appeared near the private wing. New radios crackled across security channels. 2 unfamiliar vehicles waited outside the service entrance before sunrise. Something had happened. By noon, the answer reached the staff. A junior guard had discovered activity near the old maintenance corridors and reported it directly to Security Command. By evening, the estate was operating under new instructions. Access points were being reviewed. Camera coverage was being expanded. The abandoned service passage beneath the house would be sealed permanently before the end of the week. Elena stood in the laundry corridor, reading the maintenance notice posted beside a utility panel. The paper shook slightly in her hand. Around her, cold water continued dripping from the old pipes overhead. Workers had already begun measuring sections of wall for demolition. She looked down the narrow corridor, disappearing into darkness, and suddenly understood what the order really meant. Security believed they were protecting Victor Calder. In reality, they were preparing to erase the last remaining doorway to a life he had spent years trying not to lose. That evening, Elena carried fresh towels toward the private wing. The hallway looked exactly as it had on the first night she noticed the open door. Warm amber light stretched across polished black marble. Rain reflected softly through distant windows. The same corridor, the same silence. Only now something felt different. Mr. Calder stood alone outside his room, hands resting loosely in the pockets of his coat. He appeared to be watching the rain. "They found him," he said, before she spoke. Elena stopped beside the linen cart. "I heard," His eyes remained on the window, their sealing the corridor. The words carried no anger, no surprise, only resignation. Elena studied him carefully. The reaction reminded her of the night she found the overturned clock, someone who had already accepted a loss before it arrived. "You're going to let them?" she asked. Mr. Calder was quiet for several moments. "That's what everyone expects." Elena glanced toward the far end of the hallway, where maintenance crews had stacked equipment earlier that afternoon. "Everyone expects a lot of things." His gaze finally shifted toward her. "You think I should ignore security?" "No." Then what? Elena hesitated. She was only a maid. The estate employed advisors, lawyers, managers, and men carrying weapons. None of them were asking her opinion. Yet he was standing there, waiting for an answer. She looked toward the rain beyond the glass, then back toward him. "I think you've spent years deciding what matters, based on what people are afraid of." The hallway became very still. Somewhere below them, an elevator door opened and closed. Neither moved, neither looked away. A guard approached from the stairwell, carrying a tablet. "Sir Mr. Calder did not answer immediately. Elena could almost see the decision forming behind his eyes, the same eyes that had watched a hidden visitor enter his room night after night without stopping him, the same eyes that still carried the weight of a mistake made 8 years earlier. Finally, he spoke. "Cancel the closure." The guard blinked. "Sir, cancel it." The guard hesitated only briefly before nodding and walking away. Silence returned to the hallway. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Mr. Calder watched the guard disappear before turning back toward Elena. "You notice everything." The words sounded almost tired. Elena allowed herself the smallest smile. "Only the things people keep trying to hide." For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't much. Most people would have missed it. Elena didn't, because noticing small things was how this story had begun. A week later, the rain finally stopped. The estate seemed different without it. Windows remained cracked open. Fresh air moved through the hallways. Drivers forgot umbrellas beside the entrance. Staff lingered a little longer in conversations before returning to work. The private wing felt quieter too. One evening, Elena carried a tray toward Mr. Calder's room. Coffee without sugar, mineral water, a clean glass. The same routine she had followed dozens of times before. The lamp inside was already glowing. As always, she paused at the doorway. The silver clock sat beside the bed, exactly where it belonged. The chair near the window remained in place. Nothing unusual. Then she noticed a second coffee cup. It rested beside the tray, waiting on the table. Empty. Clean. Expected. Elena looked at it for a moment before lifting her eyes toward Mr. Calder. He followed her gaze. Neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable in a way neither would have admitted. Finally, he broke it. "Leave both." Elena set the tray down carefully. She turned toward the door. "Elena." She stopped. "Yes, sir." For a moment, he seemed uncertain what to say. The hesitation itself felt strange coming from a man accustomed to giving orders. Then he spoke quietly. "Thank you." No audience, no staff, no guards, just the truth spoken without protection. Elena nodded once. "You're welcome." She stepped back into the hallway. The warm amber light stretched across the floor, exactly as it had on the night she first noticed the half-open door. Only now, the door remained open. Not wide, just enough. Enough for someone trusted to see inside. enough for someone who had spent months being invisible to finally know she wasn't anymore.